Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the luncheon of the American Women Writers National Museum. I'm so glad to have all of you here this afternoon for our program called Bama Bones. And we have a very distinguished speaker. But before I introduce her and the very distinguished lady who's going to introduce her, I wanted also to just tell you a little bit about the museum, because this videotape is often taken by the Centers for the Book and the University of Alabama and other organizations and played, and so they don't know anything about the program, so I'm telling a little bit about it first. I'm Janice Law, and I'm the founder of the American Women Writers National Museum. Women buy 70% of the books sold in America, and we women predominate at cultural events. Yet there was no national museum to honor our great American women writers. So I established a museum in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to honor America's women writers, historical and contemporary. And as I said, we've been in operation about a year. We just celebrated our first anniversary. People often ask me, well, you said you're a museum, but where's your stuff? Where is your stuff? Well, I always answer that question that we do intend to have stuff. But a lot of times museums start first by trying to get stuff and get a building and then have programs. But I did the opposite. I decided to have programs and get the museum well known, and then we're going to try this year to get a building and stuff. So our goal is to have that, but we don't right now have any. So that's our mission. I want to tell a little bit about our program that we have to honor America's women writers called the 50 State Program. Every year, every month, American Women Writers National Museum honors the women writers from 4 states. And this month, we are honoring women writers from, it's in alphabetical order, from Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. And just as a little preview, a woman from Indiana, Marilyn Pugh, wrote all the I Love Lucy scripts. How many of you knew that? You know, the writer wrote all those great I Love Lucy shows. So those are an example of the very great women we honor. After this program is over, we have a brief program of about 20 minutes where we read excerpts from some of the women writers we're honoring from the other states. It's part of the 50 State Project. I recruit people from the audience to read those excerpts. And people usually are glad to volunteer, so if anybody wants to stay after for about 20 minutes and do that, we'd love to have you read some of those excerpts. Also, our great speaker today, who will be introduced momentarily, is the author of this book, Summer Snow, and it's for sale. It's $10. So if any of you would like to buy her book, please feel free to do so. We have some very distinguished guests today. I'm going to give each of the guests about 2 minutes to say something about themselves. And our first guest is Kathy Yarborough. Kathy, could you come on up and give us 1 or 2 minutes about what you do and who you are?
As Janice said, I'm Kathy Yarborough. I'm Director of Development for the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Alabama. And we are really proud that one of our own faculty members is the speaker today. If you go to the university, you can take a class under her, and you will have a wonderful time. The university is the leading university in the state of Alabama. Currently, we have 33,602 students. And the university has 3 tenets that we operate under. One is teaching, one is research, and one is service. Dr. Harris is certainly an example of our commitment to teaching. For many years we've been known for the quality of our faculty and how accessible they are to students. I know a lot of you are Crimson Tide fans, so before I sit down, I need to get a Roll Tide. Roll Tide! So I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Harris, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Kathy. We also have some members from the, staff members from the various Alabama delegations. So I don't know all the names. I'm just going to ask each one of you to come on up. You have to come to the podium because we're videotaping this, and this is the easiest thing for the videographer. Just come on up and say your name and what office you represent. See, I think Senator Sessions has a couple of people here. Come on up. Just say your name, and if it's a congressional member, say what district you're from, if you would, please. Hi, how are you? You're from Senator Sessions'
Yes.
office, I think?
Yes. Hello, my name is May15, and I handle education is one of my issues for Senator Sessions. I went to the University of Alabama, so I am proud to be here and can't wait to hear about our book.
Okay, thank you so much. And I believe you had a colleague with you from Senator Sessions'
Yep.
office. Come on up.
Okay.
If you went to the University of Alabama, you have to say so.
Hi, I'm Sophie Trainer. I do at the University of Alabama and also work with Senator Sessions on education issues. Roll Tide.
Okay. Who's next? I think someone come on up.
Hi, I'm Ben Cantrell. I'm here on behalf of Congressman Spencer Backus, the 6th District of Alabama. I actually went to Auburn, so I can't condone what was said. Thank you so much for having us.
What is the 6th district? Colorado?
It used to have Tuscaloosa, but now it's kind of a horseshoe around that area. It's most of the Birmingham area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from an office? I think we have a couple more people.
I'm Reagan Williams. I am from Congressman Backus' office, the 6th Congressional District. I also currently go to the University of Alabama. Roll Tide.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, I think I have it here. We can sign it later, just have a seat. Thank you. Anybody else from an congressional office?
I'm Colin Cope. I'm from Mo office of Representative Mo Brooks of the 5th Congressional District of Alabama.
Where does it fit? What does that cover?
Huntsville area, northern Alabama.
Okay. And did you go to the University of Alabama?
No, I did not. University of Kentucky.
Oh, okay. Well, look here. Go Wildcats.
At least it's not Tennessee.
Roll Tide.
I'm Lacey Scott, and I'm also working for Congressman May Brooks in the 5th District, and I go to Alabama.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm Alex Miller. I'm working for Congressman Mike Rogers of the 3rd District, which is almost the whole east side of Alabama. And I go to Alabama and I major in American Studies.
Okay.
So,
Oh, great.
yeah.
And so roll tide?
Roll Tide.
You gotta remember to say that. Okay. Anybody else?
I'm Hillary Garrett, and I'm with Congresswoman Terry Sewell's office. I went to Birmingham Southern College, and the Congresswoman's district represents parts of Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and she just recently picked up parts of Montgomery.
So where's your college?
It's on the western side of Birmingham.
Okay, all right.
So it's a small.
Okay, and what's that? We've had Wildcats now and Show Tide. What is it?
Panthers.
Panthers.
That's what it is.
Okay, we've got Wildcats and Panthers. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you all very much. Oh, so you're some, okay.
My name is Krista James, and I'm also working in Congresswoman Terry Sewell's office, which is the 7th District of Alabama, and I will be a sophomore at Alabama next year. So, roll tide.
Okay. Well, I guess that got everyone. Thank you all. We're very, very appreciative that you're here. I'm going to introduce the person who's going to introduce Dr. Harris, and that is Dana Williams. Ms. Williams is the lady seated in the black and white dress, and she'll be coming up in just a minute. She's chair and professor of African American literature in the Department of English at Howard University. Dr. Williams is also vice president and program chair for the College Language Association, a member of the executive committee for the Modern Languages Association's Associated Department of English, and a member of the executive board for the Black American Literature Division of MLA. She's the author of In the Light of Likeness, Transformed, The Literary Art of Leon Forrest. She's the co-editor with Sandra G. Shannon August Wilson, and Black Aesthetics, and the editor of contemporary contemporary African American fiction, New Critical Essays, African American Humor, Irony, and Satire, Ishmael Reed, Satirically Speaking, and Conversations with Leon Forrest. She's currently working on a book project that examines Toni Morrison's editorship at Random House Publishing Company. So, and I forgot to mention at the beginning of this, that this luncheon is co-sponsored with the Alabama Center for the Book, so we're very pleased to have their cooperation in this. And I introduce Dana Williams, Dr. Dana Williams.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation to be able to introduce Trudier, and also just to be here in a general sense. It's a great room, it's a great building, and lots of wonderful things have happened here, and I'm very happy to be a part of this series. I must also say that I am a Louisiana native, and my first tenure-track job offer was to the University of Alabama, which I turned down to go to LSU. So I hope you'll let me stay in the room. But as Trudier and I were joking earlier, she tells her graduate students, don't take the job that you think is a good job, but rather take the one that you really want. And it turns out that I did not really want the job at LSU. I took it in part because my grandparents are from Alabama, Mobile actually, and so I remember asking my grandfather whether or not he would prefer that I take the job at his home state or in his current state, and he said, do whatever you feel most comfortable with. And I thought, well, I'm clearly uncomfortable making this decision, and he said, what is the most practical thing for you to do too? So that also speaks to the level of insight that grandparents can give. So it's interesting now that I find myself with many friends at the University of Alabama, and still friends at LSU as well, but now I am at Howard home. At some point in her life, Trudier Harris must have said to herself, and perhaps to someone else, I want to be a scholar, a black scholar, meaning I want to write like a black scholar, meaning subconsciously I want to be a black scholar. I play here on Langston Hughes' now famous lament of the black poet who wants to be known as a poet writ large and not as a black poet, because trying to introduce Trudier Harris without the benefit of literary devices is like trying to explain Monday night's freeze warning in DC in the middle of May. Perhaps like trying to explain summer snow, pun intended. No outright possibility is there, even as it is difficult. It is still possible to do. I also invoke Hughes here because the thing I admire most about Dr. Harris's enviable role as arguably the leading contemporary scholar of African American literature is her brazen honesty about black life and culture. Like Hughes, she knows that we are beautiful and ugly, that the tom-tom laughs and the tom-tom cries, and she grapples with this complexity without fear or shame. Her complicated relationship with the South is a case in point. By her own account, she is a porch-sitting, porch-staring, signifying Southerner. Even as she wrestles with the South's legacy, she embodies its hospitality. One of the first social encounters was at a luau in Hawaii, actually, that I had with her, where she was joined by a young girl she had mentored. Far from hands-off, thinking about doing it as some type of respectability complex that other people might have, she was an active participant in her mentee's life in every way. More recently, she completed the arduous process of becoming a foster parent, all because another young lady that she mentored, this time in her home state, was sent to a group home because no family member could care for her. Her caring extends beyond familial and social spaces to academic ones. She has mentored more students, one of which is here today, as evidence of that, read more manuscripts in progress, and ushered in more field-changing books than any other scholar I know. And she does so while being meaningfully productive herself, having carefully co-edited those crucial Dictionary of Literary Biography volumes on African American authors, and edited or co-edited at least 6 other books, including the literature of the American South. And she has authored 9 single-authored books, and more journal articles, book chapters, forewords, and introductions that would be reasonable to count. As I revisited Summer Snow this past week, a collection of autobiographical essays about her life as a daughter of the South, I was particularly struck by the language and metaphor she gives in that storytelling text that helped me to grapple with two popular culture issues that I was struggling to explain. The chapter titled Cotton Picking Authority was especially relevant for me, and I hope she'll talk a bit about that today. Cotton picking authority reminds us that real power and authority rest significantly and meaningfully to those who labor with their hands as well as their minds. There is no separation in most instances for her. As a bearer of the legacy of cotton pickers and a daughter of the South myself, with limited amount of clout since I have a PhD in a department that I chair, I hereby declare Dr. Trudy Harris is the chief cotton picker among us African American literary scholars. She works, and I endow her with chief cotton picking authority. Indeed, she has earned it, for she has taught us younger black scholars to express our dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. Because of her labor in the metaphorical field of African American literature, we can continue to build the temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, and we stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves, as only a real daughter of the South can. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Trudy Harris.
Thank you. I began by extending my thanks to Janice Law for founding the American Women Writers National Museum and for being in charge of this program. I'd also like to thank Donna Adcock of the Alabama Center for the Book and the University of Alabama Libraries for recommending to Janice Law that I be invited to do this presentation today. And thank you, Dana, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction, my colleague from the College Language Association. And lastly, I'd like to thank you because you took time out of your busy schedule today to show up here, and that is important as well. Words sing to me, and I am responsive to the tunes they want me to create. Sometimes they evoke the blues, sometimes they call forth a rousing gospel, and sometimes they're just sheer harmonies of celebration. I hear patterns or rhythms for sentences in my head, and those rhythms find their way onto my computer screen or when I'm traveling onto my notepad. Words sing to me, and I am a devotee of their songs. It is the singing power of words that enable me to articulate what it means to move from being a black person living in the South to being a black Southerner. The words sang a story of family history, a song of family history, one rooted in Deep South Alabama, and they dared me to claim that history in spite of Alabama's uncomplimentary history in race relations. Words sing to me in my study, elsewhere in my home, or when I'm a long way from home. They always let me know that I have Alabama in my bones. On one of the few vacations I've given myself, I traveled to Guadeloupe in 1993 with Citizens for International Understanding. There on a boat between a larger island and a smaller one, I came up with a title for a book project. This Disease Called Strength, I called it, and I wrote that phrase on my passenger ticket. It was intended to examine literary portrayals of the almost superhuman qualities of strength in black female characters. And it was inspired by my meditation upon my mother's labor as a domestic worker in Tuscaloosa and Greene Counties, Alabama. Eventually, this disease called strength morphed into saints, sinners, saviors, strong black women in African American literature, which Palgrave Press published in 2002. Informed by my growing up in Greene County and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, ideas come to me in various places and spaces, and I usually don't need a room of my own to be creative. I compose in the shower, when I'm riding exercise bikes at the YMCA, when I'm out walking, or when I'm stuck in traffic just before I fall asleep at night, and a host of other places and conditions. My living room and kitchen join the parade of spaces that inspire creativity, for my mind can drift from boring television shows to the excitement of new mental exploration. And unless I'm reading the newspaper or something else at the breakfast table, I find that space particularly conducive to new ideas and to new approaches to evolving ideas. Outside the arena of my personal senses of space, I bow to the fact that I live in Tuscaloosa, in the state of Alabama, and that a large portion of my creativity has been bound up with that particular space. My memoir, Summer Snow, Reflections from a Black Girl in the South, would not exist if it were not for Tuscaloosa. I, like many Southerners, identify with and allow various territories south of the Mason-Dixon line to define, at least partially, who we are and how we perceive the world. We celebrate certain sites as places of family origin, and we honor other sites, such as home places and cemeteries, as places of family history. We cherish land, terra firma, and credit it with inspiring our creative imaginations. And we become possessive when others malign or underappreciate our precious spaces. I write in Summer Snow about my annoyance with persons outside the South who over the years wanted to sympathize with me because I was born in such a backwards, poor section of the country, the American South, and they considered it primitive, bordering on the repulsive. I joined Langston Hughes. When he asserts in his poem, One-Way Ticket, I pick up my life and take it with me. So Tuscaloosa, Alabama has gone with me to Harvard, to Italy and the Bellagio Center owned by the Rockefeller Foundation, to Spain, which is my favorite country to travel to, and to the other 21 countries in 45 states with which I have notched my travel belt. In 1981, I was selected to become a fellow at the Mary Ingraham Bunting Institute at Radcliffe and Harvard. I joined 41 other women in a space that Anne Sexton made famous for taking her Bunting Institute fellowship money and spending it on a swimming pool. There, in the hallowed halls of Harvard, I concluded that the atmosphere was just too much unlike home. My mental Tuscaloosa, therefore, was my bomb against elitism, against the hordes of Harvard terminal degree holders who worked as dorm masters or held other positions on campus for which they were eminently overqualified, just so they could say that they were a part of Harvard and the mystique that it engendered in such devotees. Me? Well, I just considered myself an out-of-place cotton picker who looked forward to returning to the South as soon as my 2 years of fellowships ended. My longing for home intensified as snow dropped 6 to 8 inches in the wee hours of the winter mornings, and there was no relief for days. So in the midst of that uninviting environment, the city of Tuscaloosa, the state of Alabama, and the region of the South served as my warm spots. I even took to writing poetry about my longing for these southern spaces. On February 25, 1982, I penned the following, entitled Irony. Who would have thought that a cotton-picking, watermelon-eating colored girl from Alabama would one day become a PhD and a professor and sit in the hallowed halls of Harvard wishing for the sight of cotton and the taste of watermelon. In the frozen north of March 3, 1982, I remembered and wrote about an aunt who lived across the street when I was growing up in Tuscaloosa. It's entitled Ain't Named Sam. She would lean across her porch railing and cry out to me, "Sit according to your family." When she found me gap-legged, carelessly scrawled, flaunting nature in her face. Of course, I was too young to know what she meant or care overly much. But through high school and college and grad school, through 6 years in one job and 3 years in another, through travel to many states and several foreign countries, my distant aunt's notion of family echoed in my mind like the sound of a good morning holler chasing itself over the cotton fields of Alabama. I like the directive, sit according to your family, so much that it eventually made its way into Summer Snow. I share this not in some vain attempt to validate myself as a poet, which I decidedly am not, but because many of these ideas and reflections found their way into Summer Snow. Interestingly, when I was writing Summer Snow in 2001, I did not review any of those poems. But I think that it's an indication of how much the South has saturated my mind, that a lot of the things that appeared in Summer Snow were also in those poems that I penned at Harvard. At the Bellagio Center in Italy in 1994, I reflected upon Alabama and Tuscaloosa as I drafted a book about porch sitting and storytelling. That volume, The Power of the Porch, The Storyteller's Craft, in Zordil Hurston, Gloria Naylor, and Randall Keenan, appeared from the University of Georgia Press in 1996. Prior to publication, I had presented the chapters as the Lamar Memorial Lectures at Mercer University. Focusing on Southern porches and the power of storytelling from a literary perspective led me back to Tuscaloosa and the porches that I had sat, listened, and learned on as a child. In Bellagio, therefore, I conceived and completed the essay entitled Porch Sitting as a Creative Southern Tradition, which is one of the chapters in Summer Snow. Tuscaloosa and Southern traditions kept me mental and creative company while I lived in Italy. In another essay, I want readers to transition from the sweetness of the porch to seeing the invasion that I described in Would You Go Out with a White Boy for $5? I want you, the reader, to see me, a 12-year-old black girl in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, walking home from an elementary school PTA meeting. I want you to see the car driven by a young white man come alongside me. And I want you to hear his question. Would you go out with a white boy for $5? I want you to see the privilege that he had by feeling free to drive into a black neighborhood in the early 1960s and extend that invitation. But I don't want you to back away from what that encounter suggests. When I quickly responded no to his question, that is not where I want readers to pause. I want you to deviate from the usual pattern of contemplating race relations, that is, by mostly being silent, by reflecting at length upon the history and pattern of interaction that led to that encounter. I want you to think about black girls and women being at the sexual mercy of white men in the South. I want you to stare that monster down and understand what it means even today in thinking of mixed-race children, or stereotyping black women as overly sexually active, or of suggesting that white men came into black neighborhoods because black women encouraged them to do so. I want readers to realize that black women were indeed victims in most of the instances of sexual exchange between white males and black females in the South, from slavery through the 20th century and perhaps even into the 21st century. As a 12-year-old, I barely knew what sex was, let alone have the ability to tempt a white guy that way. Before we can truly understand how blacks and whites interacted in the South and what we need to do to achieve the true integration that we have not yet achieved, then there has to be some truth-telling. Part of that truth-telling is that, yes, indeed, white men found black women sexually attractive, pursued them in clandestine as well as open ways, mostly exploited them, and sometimes prized them. It would help us to understand better black middle-class cultures throughout the South, many of which are based on the skin color donated by white males through black women. It would help us to understand better the quadroon balls that occurred in places such as Louisiana, or the tradition of plissage that developed between white males and white black women, in which lighter-skinned black women, legally classified as black, formed romantic partnerships with white men, were given homes, and were well taken care of, as were any children born to those exchanges. It would perhaps help us to understand the category listed as mixed race that is currently all the rage in society. As far as I can tell, just about everybody in America is mixed race, and especially is that true of those of us born, bred, and living in the South. In the fall of 2003, Summer Snow was selected to inaugurate the One Book, One Community reading program in Orange County, North Carolina. Community members were given until April of 2004 to complete their reading. Then a series of community sessions, discussions were held. I attended many of those, including one for a neighborhood reading group. I spent more than 2 hours in sessions with mostly white Southern readers, a couple of Europeans, and a couple from Jamaica. Of all the material in the book, they were most interested in discussing hair. I had discovered quite some time ago in the essay, The Ubiquitous Hair. It was a point of entry for lots of non-black people in discussing summer snow. So I commented on black hair care, the politics of black hair, and the intra-group responses to various hairstyles. Finally, it came. One white woman in the group asked if she could touch my dreadlocks, which I was wearing then and which were about 15 inches long. Now, if you're going to put an essay on the reading market that can provide one of the points of entry to discussions about race, you can't say no. So right there in the meeting, this woman came over and played with my hair. At least she asked. Several folks just sneakily grabbed a lock and felt it, including a woman at a conference that I attended in 2001. The problem was that I had moved while she was holding on to the lock. And so I became aware of what was happening. And it turns out that she was somebody that I know and knew at that point. She was just curious about black hair. Curiosity. Black and white people in the South and elsewhere have been curious about each other for hundreds of years, but they seldom have opportunities to satisfy that curiosity. If Summer Snow enables some readers to do that, then let the prose sing its songs to them. We've also been curious about each other's religions in the South, and one of the One Book, One Community discussion sessions that I attended in Chapel Hill, a white female participant became rhapsodic about her adventures in a black church. As she went on and on about the music, the preaching, and the great interactions among black church members, her narrative gave me pause. She ran a risk, I caution, of romanticizing black church experience. She was not taking into consideration the depth of potential disagreements and other problematic interactions that might occur in such churches. I, on the other hand, related my feelings about white churches when I was growing up in Tuscaloosa. I was convinced, I told this audience, that white people could not believe in God. They could not possibly serve the same God we black folks did and treat us the way that they did. After all, if the ancestors of these white folks had used religion to justify enslaving black people, how could they possibly be doing the same thing in church that we were doing on Sunday morning, that is, praising God? So I grew up being really curious about what they did in those hugely beautiful church structures on Sunday morning. And I didn't get an answer for the longest time because I could not venture inside one of those structures. The first time I actually attended a quote-unquote white church was as an adult and with a friend. I was amazed that in Sunday schools, these folks were discussing literary works instead of the Bible. Well, at least it was a look at the other side. In my own church in Tuscaloosa, we were busily singing, praying, and worshiping God as best we knew how. And that provided moments of reflection for me as well. I remember church and church membership as forms of initiation. You were a sinner as long as you were out of the church. And you were saved when you rose up from the mourner's bench some revival night, told your travels, and declared that you believed in God and had been saved. I wanted readers to relate to that insider-outsider experience in the way that Langston Hughes recounts a similar experience of leaving the mourner's bench and becoming a member of the church. And I want readers to understand the extent to which church was a social institution in African American communities in the Deep South. I joined the choir and sang in it, even though I cannot carry a tune in 2 buckets, as you will shortly hear, because it gave me the opportunity to be out of the house with my neighborhood buddies when we went to choir rehearsal or travel with the group. And to debunk the stereotype that all black folks can sing, I actually created an essay in the volume called Make a Joyful Noise, in which black folks are criticized by other black folks for their inability to sing. But I also wanted to use that particular essay to bring a bit of humor into the volume. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord. In the kind of democratic churches in which I grew up, injunctions such as this were easy to follow. This one means that in church on Sunday morning, you should holler at the top of your voice, whether you have a recognized singing voice or not. People are kind and overlook your screeching because they never did know whether they were standing next to someone who was truly in the spirit, or if they were harboring the next Aretha Franklin. So some folks sang and everybody else hollered. We like to think of it as being in that great tradition in which it would believe that everyone who has a voice can sing. No Juilliard School of Music, no singing at the Met, just folks down home singing for the sake of praising the Lord. Some of my earliest exposures to making joyful noises were the songs with which the church deacons would begin each Sunday's worship. One of them would sing the first line of a song by himself rather rapidly. Then the others and the entire congregation would join in singing the same line at a tremendously slower pace. This was called lining out hymns, and apparently emerged from the periods in which songbooks were not readily available. So a song leader would there said for line out the song, or line by line or verse by verse. Shall I be carried to the sky on flowery SUVs? No, there's a cross for everyone and there's a cross for me. They would line it out like that, and then the congregation would join in and say, shall I be carried to the sky on flowery beds of ease? No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. Now, y'all, some people are nodding off. I know. So we did that. So I joined the junior choir, and we sang. And of the 15 of us, so of us who made up the junior choir, I was the only participant from my family. My siblings didn't even pretend that they could sing who joined the choir. The canons, however, would have 5 or 6 of their stair-step daughters singing in the choir. Polite and well-mannered, these girls could at least carry a tune. Their problem, therefore, was not lack of talent, it was giggling. One of the other of them was liable to start giggling, sometimes with good reason and sometimes just for the heck of it, in the middle of a church song on Sunday morning. If the offended one were lucky, she could get back into the serious singing after a few titters. Mostly, they were lucky. Then came a fateful Sunday. We had prepared for that Sunday by learning a new song. It was fast-paced, and when learned, brought the surprise of accomplishment that follows reciting a complicated tongue-twisting rhyme 4 or 5 times in succession. The words and phrases were simple. The trick was to remember to put them in the right order. It was an old spiritual about how the newly converted feel after their transformation is completed through baptism. So, words are, decked in the water, come up shouting, no more doubting. He will hear us and be near us. We'll be given bread from heaven. He will feed us until we want no more. Ducked in the water, come up shouting, no more doubting. He will hear us and be near us. We'll be given bread from heaven. He will feed us until we want no more. Simple enough. Unless you got the words out of line and the lines out of order. Now the singing was so fast it would be difficult to recover. Anyhow, Joan Cannon forgot some of the words and started saying things like peas and cornbread, taters and tomatoes, and practically turned the choir out. Although most of us contained ourselves and kept on singing at this breakneck pace, Joan's sister April couldn't control her giggling and burst out laughing. Right in the middle of what was supposed to be an uplifting praise song, there she was, cracking up while standing up, then sitting down in the middle of the song and continuing to laugh uncontrollably. It was, in the vernacular of the day, a scandalous. And Mrs. Cannon was indeed scandalized. It's hard to apologize for working until after during church service, especially when you are in the middle of singing one of the songs of Zion. Mrs. Cannon grounded April for a week and refused to let her sing in the choir for the next 2 months. Poor April was so tickled by it all that she never could get in the proper frame of mind to feel as if she were being punished. But then, how does one punish someone for being, as they determine it, disrespectful to God? After all, couldn't laughter be considered one of the joyful noises that God might find pleasing? All anybody had to do for the next several weeks to get April laughing would be to mention those taters and tomatoes. I am asked again and again, before folks have had the chance to read the last chapter in Summer Snow, why the volume is entitled Summer Snow. Well, I say, it's about being black in the South. Lots of folks lived and do now live in the South. but throughout the history of their presence, not many of them claimed being Southerners. It's sort of like being a Baptist in Alabama as opposed to being a Southern Baptist in Alabama. So for black folks to claim Southernness, I argue, is about as rare as snow falling in Tuscaloosa during dog days, hence summer snow. I am a Southerner, I claim Southernness. As I have explained again and again, that does not mean I am going to go out and participate in Civil War reenactments. Nor does it mean that I approve of the Confederate flag flying in various places in the South. It does, however, mean that I like living south of the Mason-Dixon line and east of the Mississippi River. It means that I defend the South against outsiders who want to make it and the Southerners look like we're the worst part of the country. And it means that when I retired, I returned to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, instead of moving to Arizona or Florida. It's all about comfort levels. And again, I find that I don't want to freeze my butt off in Chicago or New York or deal with the pristine static beauty of California. Generally, I can say that throughout my career, no matter where I have lived, the city of Tuscaloosa, the state of Alabama, the region of the South have informed what I have written and what I have done. Whether that was in Spain over the several years that I traveled there, in Brazil in 1995 and again in 1999, in South Africa in 2006 for a semester, in Atlanta for 3 years between 1993 and 1996, or in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for almost 30 years before I retired to Tuscaloosa in 2009. Now the state of Alabama and the South inform my writing yet again in my latest book manuscript. This is a project that I started more than 10 years ago when I was still in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There in the fall of 2000, I taught a first-year seminar to students on Martin Luther King's influence on African American literature. The neophyte students were a couple of generations removed from civil rights activity, and they were mostly without substantive knowledge of the period. So we set out to explore everything we could about King, the 60s, and African American literature. We read Tale of Branches, Pulitzer Prize winning Parting the Water, America in the King years. We divided into groups that did a variety of things. Some focused on Chapel Hill and the archives of civil rights activity there. Others focused on the music of the period and created websites and produced CDs containing some of that music. Others dramatized events of the movement and made films of their dramatization. There were also projects on the women of the civil rights movement and, of course, how African American writers have portrayed King and the movement in literature. And J. Dean Johnson, here today, was in that class. I deem that King's influence in African American literature was a rich area for exploration, and that I would turn it into a larger book-length project. I was especially drawn to the fact that though King was born in Atlanta, most of his significant early civil rights victories occurred in Alabama. Those included the Montgomery bus boycott, the marches in Selma, and the Birmingham campaign. His iconic epiphany, which his biographers refer to again and again, occurred in his kitchen in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, where he had this vision of God saying, "I will always be with you." It is striking that none of King's major civil rights victories took place in his home state of Georgia. Indeed, one of his major embarrassments was the Albany, Georgia campaign. So just as Alabama dominated with King in the 50s and 60s, perhaps it is appropriate that a scholar from Alabama should focus on King in the second decade of the 21st century to unearth the extent to which he is incorporated, rejected, conceptualized, reconceptualized, reified, or iconic in African American literature. And one of the writers that I deal with is Charles Johnson, who has a short story entitled Dr. King's Refrigerator, in addition to his book called Dreamer, which is about Dr. King and a Dr. King look-alike. So I'll put the finishing touches on that book manuscript, which was drafted last year, accepted for publication. I'll put the finishing touches on it this summer, and it will appear in 2014. So it is appropriate that I'm finishing it up on Alabama soil, the territory that has meant so much to Dr. King and me. Just as he found his call to destiny in Montgomery, I found my calling shortly after exiting the cotton fields in Greene County, Alabama. Although I could barely tell you now what the cotton planting and picking season is these days, my family history and experiences in a culture that had Alabama agriculture as its backdrop have shaped me into the human being I am today. I am a Southerner in spite of myself. And no matter where I've traveled or what I've encountered, I have always wended my way imaginatively back to the territory of my birth. Words sing to me, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the South are their muses. Always, I am responsive to the tunes they want me to create. It is the singing power of words that enable me to articulate what it means to move from being a black person living in the South to being a black Southerner. It is the singing power of words that keeps me engaged as a scholar, teacher, and writer. As long as the words sing their Southern tunes, I will happily be the instrument on which they can shape their bluesy Bama songs. Thank you.
Wow, that was a real treat. Even we got singing too. That was great.
Christian, you cannot publish that.
It made you want to stand up and shout amen. That was just great. That was super. Thank you so much. We're honored. And thank you, Dana, for introducing Dr. Harris. And thank you, Kathy, from the University of Alabama and the Alabama Center for the Book for co-sponsoring this. Any questions from anybody they want to ask Dr. Harris? Any questions? I was going to ask her, your students now are black and white, I'm assuming. Would you give any different, what advice would you give to them as writers, black students and white students, and any specific advice for black student writers?
Just student writers generally.
Okay.
I think any writer has to, first of all, be a reader. You have to read. You have to become familiar with styles. You have to become familiar with the history of writing in your culture, in your communities, and you have to be willing to commit to the art of writing. I always tell my students, they think writing is in some special category, but writing is like playing tennis, or swimming, or being a running back, Mark Ingram, at the University of Alabama. Mark Ingram did not go out all of a sudden one day and say, I want to be a running back, and just run through everybody, score 5 or 6 touchdowns. But he's been practicing since he was old enough to practice. So it takes practice, and I think unless I suggested in an interview that I did a couple of years ago, that if you're not willing to spend a lot of time by yourself, then you should run for the hills. You should never think about being a writer or a scholar, because a lot of times those are solitary activities. If you notice how I document the many ways in which creative thoughts come to me, and I'm by myself a lot of those times, in the shower, or exercising, or walking, or cooking, or those kinds of things. So you have to read first. You have to commit yourself to the discipline, and you have to be open to see the things there are around you to see. And you got to know some history. One thing that I'm constantly shocked by these days is how illiterate students are. They want to be a poet, but they never heard of a poet. You want to be a fiction writer, you never read a novel. You think it's just going to descend on you from the air. You have to think about swimming and playing tennis and being a running back, or any other skill. Writing is a skill. People might have a certain kind of innate intelligence that enables them to be better at a skill than other people, but it's still a skill that can be improved. I think that's what I would say. And I forgot, and thanking all the people, thank Kathy specifically for coming. Thank you, Kathy. Okay. Maybe people want some more lunch.
If there are no more questions, we'll conclude. I know a lot of people are on your lunch hour. You came here, so I appreciate that very much. And again, Dr. Harris's book, Summer Snow, is for sale. It's $10 if anybody wants to buy it. And museum memberships are available also. If you want to join the museum, we'd appreciate that. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming. If somebody would like to stay and help with the 50 State Project, it's about 20 minutes and read an excerpt from a woman writer from one of our states, I'd love to have you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.